Hello everyone, welcome back to the Wonky Studio with me, Holly Rose Stones. If you don't know who I am a contemporary artist working primarily with prop making, set design and self-portraiture. I am currently working on a project called the Colour Project where I explore surreal worlds using monochromatic sets and props and create these dynamic visions that I have coming out of my brain. So I've currently done the green project, the yellow project, the pink project, and I've just finished the blue project. And at the end of this video, I will be announcing my next colour project. So stick around for that because I'm excited to delve into that one. Today I'm going to be talking you through the blue project. So I've got my phone here just with a few notes just so that I stay on track because sometimes I go a little off track. It's just my personality. So most of my ideas come to me in daydreams, at night when I'm dreaming, and in the studio, walking my dog, in the shower. I have little pockets of moments where I can just sit and think and my ideas will just come to me. And an idea will come and I'll marinate it for a little bit. I'll think about it maybe for the next few days. And if it's not sitting right with me, I then move on. So once I've sort of thought of an idea, I'll end up writing it down. And this can be a scribble in a notepad. I usually, in the middle of the night, wake up and just use my phone, write down a couple of notes in there. When I wake up in the morning, I've noticed that what happens is I can really zone in on that idea again. And it's almost like it comes to me exactly how I first visioned it. And that's what I mean when I say it marinates, because it almost kind of imprints into my brain. And I've got a little filing cabinet of ideas that I kind of store over the years. So the green project, which I will talk about actually in another video because I think I'm going to do a video like this for each one, just to give you an idea of where the ideas came from. But for that project, that idea actually came to me about 6 or 7 years prior to actually shooting it. So it's almost like I've got a little filing cabinet in my brain where I can just flick through and go, yeah, that one works for me. So that gives you a little bit of an insight into how my brain works when it comes to creating these ideas. But I'm going to now move on to the blue project and how the telephone came into my brain. The blue project idea. I've often had a fascination with perspective and creating things bigger or smaller in an image, or making me larger or making me miniature, whether that is laying on a banana or creating a larger ear or making flowers bigger than life size. I've just always had this fascination with different perspectives and the surrealism involved in that. I've always managed to do that in Photoshop, but what I wanted for this next project, the blue project, was to play around with creating something mega oversized, actually real, actually physical, actually tangible, so you could touch it. I kind of wanted to create the illusion that I've edited it in Photoshop and it is enlarged in Photoshop when actually it is real life. That's kind of where I was going with this idea, and before I'd even thought of the prop, I knew I wanted to sort of make something big. And for some reason, I'm not even sure where it came from, it sort of came to me out of the blue, and it kind of spoke to me when I thought of the telephone. And I wanted a vintage telephone. I wanted a telephone that was going to look more like a 70s, 80s vibe. Not a super vintage telephone, but a mid-century telephone. And that's kind of what I was searching for when it came to inspiration for the giant telephone. Each of these projects has kind of been an individual chapter. It's kind of encapsulated an individual chapter in my life. So the green project, I know exactly how I was feeling, what I was doing in that period of time in my life, and same for the yellow project and same for the pink project. In retrospect, now I can look back and see why I've made certain choices. At the time, it might not necessarily make any sense to me. I just sort of go with the flow. I kind of don't really think about it too much, especially when I'm in the flow of making a prop. I'm just right, I'm just going to make this prop and then see where it goes, rather than it needs to be exactly like this, it needs to be exactly like this, or the idea or the concept. I'm not telling the story that I want to. I kind of just let it flow out of me, and then the story kind of comes afterwards, after the idea has marinated, come to life. I think with my practice being self-portraiture and the idea that each of these colour projects are a chapter of my life, I'm telling such an emotional story within each of these colour projects. So Looking back now, I can see why I made the choices for the blue project. It was over the time period where my nana got really super ill, and there were lots of phone calls happening. I've managed to sort of take control of that when it comes to phone calls over the years to deal with my nana and granddad, because I think as you get older it's a little bit more daunting to go to the doctors or, you know, face the prospect of not being well. If I look at it now, I think maybe I sort of like connected the dots of like my nana sort of being poorly, and in the last sort of few days of her life, I was on the phone to the doctors, we were running around trying to get things for her. And so, for example, we were ringing the doctor to get a commode because she needed a commode for those last days. And because I was creating this prop at the time, I think subconsciously I've kind of probably connected this prop to my grief. Because she passed away a couple of days after Christmas, and I'd only been doing this prop probably about 5-6 weeks at that point. So I feel like maybe that this project and this, I don't know, encapsulated my grief within the blue project. I also had started therapy at the start of this project. I think this project will always remind me of the time I kind of made the step to help my brain. And it's kind of the time that I personally asked for help. I think I needed it at that point. And I only can see that now after creating it, after finishing it, after reflecting on it for a few weeks. That's how I'm able to see this project, and that's why these projects are just so personal to me. Once I decided on the prop, it was time to start planning, and I hadn't quite established a concept at this point, again, like I said, but I knew exactly what I wanted in terms of the prop. I knew I wanted it all blue, I wanted it huge like this, I wanted it almost taller than me, and with it being my first prop of this size, it was an exciting one for me. I also knew that I wanted to hold it in the air, so I needed it to be longer than me. I hadn't quite at this point figured out the logistics as well, but I knew that I wanted to reuse and recycle all of my materials that I already had, existing materials. A couple of years ago we renovated this studio, and I've got some videos on this channel if you want to go have a look at them. The roof was actually insulated with about 4-inch polystyrene, and we had about 2 or 3 offcuts, maybe one sheet. No, actually there was like a couple of sheets left. I often keep everything, literally everything. Jack always gets a little bit annoyed with me because I'm a bit of a hoarder. It's sometimes a blessing because, like this particular time, I was able to make a massive giant phone out of some offcuts of polystyrene from the roof. Sometimes it's a curse because I don't have enough space to save everything, so I have to be a bit choosy with what I'm saving. The first question was how. How am I going to transform these pieces of polystyrene into a giant phone? I originally decided to get a telephone so that I could use it as inspiration. I managed to get a telephone off a cart boot for like a £5. Funnily enough, on that particular day, there was about 3 different stalls selling the same telephone. So I don't know if it was fate, but whatever. If we believe in that, maybe I do. I started with the base of the telephone, building from the ground up. I made the polystyrene structure, and then the next step was to carve the curvature of the edges. I hadn't created a prop of this size for my art before, so this was a real learning curve, and there's a lot I wouldn't do again. For example, I wouldn't use a hot pen to carve polystyrene. It's so easy to sand, and once I'd carved out the curves with the pen, I went back over the edges with the sander, and I learned quickly that I'd wasted so much time and effort on the hot pen. Not to mention the fumes were horrific, and I'm probably never going to use that hot pen on polystyrene ever again. It was just a bad idea. So the next step was to paper mache, and once I was happy with the structure of the shape, I used paper mache to cover the whole body of the telephone. Again, I wouldn't use paper mache again on top of the polystyrene. Not unless I was prepared to do multiple coats, but I wasn't. But to be honest, after one coat of the paper mache, I really wanted to move on to the next step and figure out how to make the buttons. So at this point, I was not prepared to do more coats because it took too long. And took too long to dry as well, because it was December and freezing in the studio. No matter how much heat I blasted on it, it wouldn't dry very quickly. I also feel like I used the wrong type of glue, and I think in one of my videos I said that using wallpaper paste would be better, but it wasn't. I think PVA is what you need. So it was time then to figure out how I was going to make the buttons. So I ended up cutting the polystyrene sheets that I had in half. I then drew circles on the polystyrene and cut them out on the bandsaw. I then sanded them down with the belt and disc sander, and that was super satisfying. Actually, I loved doing that. Again, wear masks when you're using polystyrene because dust everywhere. I covered the buttons then in paper mache. Again, I would probably use Mod Rock in the future because I think they feel more solid and not as bumpy, and I could have sanded them. So I ended up painting the buttons a light blue with the dark numbers, and I'd asked for some advice on Instagram and everyone suggested that the light blue with the dark looked better. So when it came to painting the body of the telephone, I actually started painting it lighter blue, but then I realised that I preferred the richer tone of the darker blue, which was like more of a cobalt blue. You know, the contrast of the numbers was just much nicer. And it was more in keeping with kind of the idea that I wanted, because I really wanted this nice rich blue, not like that really lighter wishy-washy blue. I didn't want a sky blue, I wanted a rich dark blue. So I ended up painting over the lighter blue, but it was also really good for it to have two coats, so I wasn't too unhappy about that. And then when I placed the buttons on, I realised that where I'd cut out the circle, it was all blended into one, so I ended up painting a border around the circle to match the lighter buttons. And once I had finished that, the body of the telephone was complete, so it was now time to go onto the handset. I went through many stages of trial and error to make the handset. First I tried balloons, huge balloons, and covered them in paper mache. And again, if you're making a huge prop, paper mache is just, it's just not for me. I prefer Mod Rock, which is what I discovered for this handset. So I was working in the studio making this prop on New Year's Eve, and it was so cold. So I think because of the temperatures, that's why the balloons shrank, and that's why the paper mache just crumpled and went misshapen. I then decided to order some beach balls because I thought beach balls might work, but again, I don't think that was a good idea because beach balls are not completely round, so it didn't work. After a lot of failed attempts, I posted it, I think, on my Instagram, and a few people, including my best friend Kirsty, suggested Mod Rock. But yeah, for some reason, I'd completely forgot what it was called, but she suggested it and I was like, right, I am ordering some of that and I'm giving that a go because I feel like that is what I need. I decided as well, instead of trying to create a circle, I was just going to buy a polystyrene ball already in the size of the circle parts, already in this size, so that I could just cover it up and modify it from there. It was quite a hard task to find some polystyrene balls, but I ended up finding this one, which was about 30 quid, and it came as one ball in two, so it kind of locks together, but luckily I don't want it to be together, I wanted it to be apart, and it ended up working perfectly. And this, as much as I love the body of the telephone, this is my favourite part. So yeah, I made the handle in between and I used some cardboard. This was quite tricky, but I ended up stuffing it so it's a bit more sturdier. I then used Mod Rock to cover the whole handset. This was such a satisfying process. It was quite hard to use at first. I messed up a little bit, and then I realised I needed to cut it up into smaller bits and be very quick with it and not be too, don't touch it too much, just get it straight on after I've wet the material. Then I sanded it all down, spent quite a while sanding it all down, just to make it smooth, but in the end I only sanded this front bit and then these bits because the back bit wasn't going to be seen anyway, so I just ended up painting over that. So after that I then painted it all blue, the same colour as the telephone, and I was finished. I also made some butterflies because I wanted to create a sort of connection to the first project. With it being about 4 projects later, I wanted to sort of create a connection to the green project. So where I used the butterflies on the green project, I kind of wanted to bring them into the blue project. I kind of felt like it needed some extra element to the telephone, just to maybe give a bit more on scale, just to show how big this telephone actually is. So once I had all my props sorted, it was then shoot day. I set up the night before, as I always do with all my shoots. Me and Jack ended up setting it up together so that I could... 1 minute, bear with me, there is a tractor going past. As I have it hanging here, I needed some help with that, so I ended up getting Jack to help me. And we spent the evening just setting it up. And then I had to play around with poses. When I practiced the poses the day before, on the day of the shoot, I end up looking at it with more fresh, creative eyes. If I can practice the day before, then it gives me a bit more time to really know what I want from the shoot. So yeah, it just gives me that freedom to look at it with new perspective. I set up my lights. I use a Godox DP400 3 at the minute, but I am going to be probably upgrading to some pro photo gear soon. I use the A7 IV with usually a 35mm lens because that's what I've been using for each of these projects and I wanted it to be consistent. So I usually shoot all my projects on my own. I am a self-portrait photographer, so I end up doing lighting, shooting, editing, everything, production, all on my own. But sometimes I get Jack, my partner, to just help me press the button of the camera and just set it up with me because sometimes it's just easier to have his help. I usually use the tether table with the tether cord to my camera so that I have my laptop set up and that I can see the shoot. But for this particular shot, I used my phone with the Imaging Edge app and I put the phone, I just balanced it actually on the phone, my phone on the phone, every time I was shooting so that I could have a look quickly. It just saved me getting on and off the telephone and I was in position so I could shoot really quickly, look at the images and then start again. And it just made it a lot easier. So how I usually do this is I'll shoot for a while. So I'll shoot for probably about half an hour, maybe to an hour, depending on how long I want to shoot for, but between half an hour and an hour. And I spend a long time focusing on getting a base image. This means that my face, my hair looks how I want it to look. And then I can always add in limbs. I can always change my arm, which I think I did for this project. I ended up using a different arm and a different leg. It just means that the picture of my face is how I want it to look, and then I can change the different parts of my body. I don't tend to do this, but with this project, because I was balancing, it was always hard to get back into the same position. So I was happy just to composite them on top. So in post-production, I always edit in Photoshop and Lightroom, mainly Photoshop, and then I edit the colours and stuff in Lightroom. Then I bring it back into Photoshop and tweak everything. When I went into the edit of the Blue project, I wasn't going to use the butterflies. I was very adamant that I wasn't going to use them. So on the first day I was editing, I was like, no, they don't need to be there. After day one, I was very like, this image is not coming out the way that I wanted it to. So I went back the next day and I inserted all the butterflies and it just finished it off. And I feel like that's why I never finish an edit in a day. I always go back to it the next day now, because then you go back with super fresh eyes. Your eyes almost adjust to the image in front of you and you don't see it anymore. You might just see the individual pixels all dancing around together, but you're not actually seeing what's going on. So the next day helps me to visualize and see exactly where I want to take this image. So that is the end of the Blue project and where I took it, how I made it, what the outcome was, and I'm super pleased with the actual outcome of this project. I don't think I've finished with the Blue telephone prop. I have some more ideas with it, but it's not going to be studio, it's actually going to be location shooting. So you have that to look forward to in terms of seeing the telephone again. I'm not really sure where I'm going to store it. That's for another day to decide. It's currently just sitting in my studio. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the little breakdown video of the Blue project and how I came to create it. Looking back now, I would have probably done lots different, but I've learned so much and it was such a distraction from my life at that time in my life. Those 3 to 4 months were very difficult for me, so the telephone prop was kind of like a light, just kept me sane at that point, and I really enjoyed making it. The next project, my next colour project, is going to be the orange project. I hope you are as excited as I am. Not sure where I'm going to take it at the moment, but have a few little ideas marinating in my brain. But yeah, I can't wait to start it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you are new here, consider subscribing. I do creative vlogs, talk about mental health, do self-portraiture, prop making, set design, and I'm also super into gardening at the minute, so you might see a bit of that on here because I'm creating some new blooms and vegetables for some self-portrait projects that I'm going to be doing in the summer or when everything needs to be harvested. Thank you again, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!